Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week the first guy, Cooper Kupp, the Los Angeles Rams. So Cooper Kupp, once again, the number one receiver so far in the first few weeks here. I know it's not the greatest of matchups versus the Dallas Cowboys, but there's no way Cooper Kupp each and every week in these ranking videos won't be number one or number two. So this week I got him number one. Number two, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So after a couple weeks of struggling for Jefferson in weeks 2 and 3, he came back with a monster ball game in week 4 in the London game. It was Justin Jefferson versus the Saints defense. And this week here, he's got a great matchup versus Chicago, and I expect another monster game out of him. Number 3, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, he's been a fantasy stud so far this season. We know Tua is out with the injury, and Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the starting quarterback now for the next few weeks, at least minimum for this Miami team. But he's got a good matchup versus the New York Jets in New York, a team that secondary is very beatable. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if Tyreek Hill does get 30-plus fantasy points in this one. Number 4, Stephon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. So Diggs, the first 3 weeks of the season, got off to a huge start. And then last week versus Baltimore, they shut him down surprisingly with Stephon Diggs. But this week here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, their secondary not that great. Their defense has been scored on and torched over the last few weeks. And I think Diggs has a huge performance this week here. And I got him at number 4. Number 5, Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Evans, last week he broke out in that ball game with 103 yards and 2 touchdowns versus Kansas City. And now Tom Brady's got all his weapons back. He's got a great matchup this week versus the Atlanta Falcons. I give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And I think Evans, his ceiling is high this week here. Chris Godwin back as well to open the field up even more. And this Buck team, they got to get back to that pass-happy team. Early in the first few weeks, they were just looking to run the football, kill the clock, and stuff like that. But this offense is too good now not to do that. So I think Evans, once again, has a big week this week. Number 6, Davante Adams of the Vegas Raiders. So far, so good this season here with Adams, with this Raider team, except one bad ball game in week 2. But week 5 here, they're going to have to put the ball up early and often. Is this Vegas Raider team and a Kansas City Chief team that scores a lot, and they do give up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I think Adams, once again, has a good ball game, and he's locked in as the number 1 wide receiver for your fantasy team. Number 7, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo Samuel, he's a stud receiver, no doubt about it. A gadget guy over there in San Francisco, and we saw the versatility from him on Monday Night Football, catching that crazy jump ball, then breaking a tackle and housing it over a 50-yard touchdown. So right here, Carolina, they're not really going to make a difference in this game. They're one of the worst teams in the league, in my opinion. I know Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the greatest quarterbacks, but he always finds his man in Deebo Samuel, and I think he has another monster game this week, and I got him 7. Number 8, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So A.J. Brown, it's been a good start for him with his new team this season. The Eagles are flying high, no pun intended, this season so far, where they're 4-0, the only undefeated team left on the season. And this week they got a good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals that get torched for the most part through the air. And once again, I think it's going to happen here with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, at least double-digit fantasy points each and every week here for this Philadelphia team in PPR leagues. And he's had that one monster game in week 1 where he went for over 25 fantasy points. But right here, week 5 at Arizona, I could see a mini shootout between these two teams. And I could see A.J. Brown having a big one in this one. Number 9, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase, he's only had one monster ball game this season, and the rest were mediocre 10, 12-point fantasy games. But this Baltimore team can't stop anyone in the secondary. They give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. And we're going to see a shootout on Sunday Night Football between these division rivals, Cincinnati Bengals and Baltimore Ravens. So right here, I think Chase has his biggest game of the season here. And I got him at number 9. Number 10, his teammate T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Higgins, he's been more consistent and has put up better ball games so far in the early going for the Cincinnati Bengal team than Jamar Chase, including last week with 25 fantasy points in PPR leagues versus Miami. And this Raven team can't stop anyone. And I think we see a big ball game once again here for T. Higgins. And I got him at 10. Number 11, Hollywood Brown of the Arizona Cardinals. So Hollywood Brown, he's having a great season here with this Cardinal team. I thought he might have took a step back a little bit coming in to the year, but I've been wrong, no doubt about it. In the last few weeks here monster production and monster ball games. Week 3 versus the Rams, 14 catches, 140 yards, 17 targets. In Week 4, Carolina, 6 catches, 88 yards, and he found the end zone. So the last 2 games, 28 targets here for Hollywood Brown. And this Philly team, I know they're good on defense, but they're vulnerable to the pass, giving up the 17th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And this game, I think, is going to be a shootout, and Hollywood Brown is going to have another good one this week. Number 11, number 12, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Godwin came back last week, and he looked pretty good in that ball game for the most part. 10 targets, 7 catches, 59 yards. And this week here versus Atlanta, they give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And Tom Brady, he loves hitting Chris Godwin. He loves having him back in the lineup. And I think we see another good ball game here from Godwin with more plays on the field. Even though he played 80% plus of the snaps in that ball game, I think we could see even more from him this week. And the Bucs, they're not happy after losing to Kansas City, and they're going to come out gunning in this one. Number 13, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Sutton, I feel like, is the only guy over there really on this offense that's producing anything for this team. So far, he's been a solid player in fantasy leagues, with at least over the last 3 weeks scoring 16 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues is Sutton. So Week 5 here, Thursday Night Football, not a great matchup versus Indianapolis, but Russell Wilson, he's zeroing in on Courtland Sutton, and everyone else in that passing game pretty much hasn't done anything. So right now, he's a low-end number 1, number 2 wide receiver for fantasy owners. And I got him in number 13, number 14, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So a great season it's been so far for Kirk. Last week, I'm just throwing that whole game out as a whole for that Jacksonville team. Wet conditions, rainy ball game, tough defense in Philly. The weather should be nice, obviously, over here in Jacksonville after all the storms have hopefully passed now. And he's got a good matchup versus the Houston Texans. I know the Texans aren't the worst versus the pass this season, but they are beatable secondary. And Christian Kirk, he's the number 1 target here for Trevor Lawrence, and it's paying big dividends for Lawrence and this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And I think this week here, he has a good ball game. Number 15, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. So right here, I would have had Keenan Allen in the top 15, obviously, but he hasn't played in multiple weeks now as Allen, and who knows if he's going to come back. So for your information, Keenan Allen, he's going to be a guy that would be in the top 15, obviously, if he's going to play. At time of recording this video, we don't know for sure, obviously, if he's going to play. So Mike Williams last week had a big ball game, 7 catches, 120 yards, operating once again as the number 1 receiver at Houston. And right here in Week 5 at Cleveland, I think we could see more of the same. A nice ball game here for Mike Williams. Gerald Everett had a good ball game as well. And those are the top 2 targets in the passing game here for Justin Herbert. And Mike Williams this week, number 2 wide receiver. He's perfect at 15. Number 16, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So right now they're letting Geno Smith throw the rock. And it's been great for DK Metcalf over the last 2 weeks since Pete Carroll has opened this offense up. And they've had great matchups as well, no doubt about it. Week 3 versus Atlanta, 5 catches, 64 yards, a touchdown. And Week 4 at Detroit, a monster game, 7 catches, 149 yards. So Week 5 here at New Orleans, another solid matchup where they give up the 11th most points to wide receivers this season here. And DK Metcalf, we know he's a freak. We know that he's their number 1 wide receiver here. And he's a guy got at number 16, number 17, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So Jalen Waddle, he's been off to a hot start, and we know Teddy Bridgewater is in there at quarterback, and his numbers might take a hit like they did last week at Cincinnati. Only 2 catches, 39 yards. But right here, Week 5, I like the matchup at the New York Jets here for Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle's a speed receiver, a possession receiver. And Teddy Bridgewater, the only thing he's got to do is just get the ball in the right spots to his receivers here, like a Jalen Waddle. And they'll do the rest, and I think he could do that this week here at the New York Jets. And Jalen Waddle's a great receiver. As a number 1 low-end receiver or number 2 option, you can't go wrong. And I got him this week 17, number 18, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb's played good football with Cooper Rush, believe it or not, especially over the last 2 weeks. Week 3 at the Giants, 8 catches, 87 yards, a touchdown on 12 targets. And last week versus the Commanders, 6 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. So this Ram team, believe it or not, gives up the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And I think CeeDee Lamb in this one could have a good ball game once again. And he's a guy that's a dynamic receiver, but for some reason I feel like he's more consistent with Cooper Rush. Number 19, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Michael Pittman, so far, he's been struggling, and he's definitely a buy low candidate at the wide receiver spot. Him and Matt Ryan just haven't been on the same page since week 1, where he had a monster fantasy game. Is Pittman going for 27 points in that one, and then week 2 the injury, and maybe the injury's still lagging, but last week in a plus matchup versus Tennessee, what a horrible ball game. 3 catches, 31 yards, but right here, Thursday Night Football, I think they're going to get the kinks out a little bit. And he's a guy as a number 2 wide receiver this week here I would have confidence in is Michael Pittman. But if he don't get things going once again this week here, that's definitely a red flag, but I'm playing it safe with him, and I got him in 19. Number 20, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So right now, Michael Thomas, he would have been in the top 20 as well. But who knows if he's going to play as Michael Thomas. Right now, banged up with a toe injury, and if he's a guy, once he gets an injury, he's really been dogging it, is Michael Thomas over the last few seasons. So Olave, he's been pretty solid so far, especially the last 2 weeks here, being the number 1 target, it seems like, for this team. And right here, Seattle's a very beatable secondary. We saw it, obviously, in week 4 versus the Detroit Lions, where they put up 45 points, and Josh Reynolds went over 100 yards in that game. So Olave, he's been a stud receiver so far in his rookie year, and there's got to be a number 2 receiver, a flex option. You can't go wrong, and I got him 20. Number 21, Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans. So the Texans, a decent matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars this week here. And Brandon Cooks, he hasn't been the same so far this season, but last week it was good to see him bounce back versus the Chargers with 7 catches, 57 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, good matchup at the Jaguars. And as a number 2 wide receiver, this week I could see it from him on your roster at 21, 22, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. So Lockett this season, he's been more consistent than he has in season past to start the season, with at least double-digit fantasy points in the first 3 out of 4 ball games. And last week at Detroit, 6 catches, 91 yards again with a fumble loss. So Geno Smith, he's really getting the football to his top 2 targets in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And this week here in New Orleans, they're vulnerable to the pass, giving up the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And once again here, I think Lockett is locked in as a solid number 2 wide receiver for your roster. And I got him at 22, 23, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith, it's been 1 good game, 1 bad game, and 1 monster game and 1 mediocre game, it seems like it's been for him so far in the early going. But he's a guy every week as a number 2 receiver, a flex option, you just put in there in your lineup, and you expect good things. Last week was a wet ball game and rain. Only 3 catches, 17 yards. But right here, week 5 at Arizona, I believe this ball game is going to be a shootout. And I got Smith at 23, 24, Adam Thielen of the Minnesota Vikings. So the last 2 weeks here, Adam Thielen, he's been playing good football, and he's getting more targets. And I think this week here, it's another beatable matchup for him versus the Chicago Bears, a team that he's had good history against, obviously playing in the division and being on the Vikings for many seasons. So Adam Thielen as a back-end number 2 receiver is perfect at 24. 25, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So Drake London last week had an off game, but before that, he's been the best rookie wide receiver, in my opinion. And week 5 here, they're going to have to throw the football a lot, like it or not, where I know this Atlanta Falcon team likes to run the ball a lot, but right here, they're going to have probably chase points in the game script. And Drake London this week gets back on track with at least double digits. I believe 26 this week. Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. So Cooper, he's an up and down type of player. We saw it the last few seasons for him with the Dallas Cowboys. And so far, we've seen it the first 4 games here with the Browns. 2 monster games and 2 horrible games for him. But right here, week 5 versus the Chargers, they give up the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And he's the only wide receiver over there in Cleveland with any fantasy relevancy. So right now, as a number 2 wide receiver, a flex option, I still have confidence in him this week after a bad week. And I got him at 26, 27, Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. So Doubs right now could be emerging as the number 1 wide receiver over there in Green Bay. And this week here, on paper, not a great matchup versus the Giants, but I still think it's a beatable secondary. And Doubs, the last 2 games, has had touchdowns. But last week, he dropped a deep ball that he could have had, and then another one in the back of the end zone, just couldn't drag that other foot. So he just missed out on a huge ball game once again in week 4 versus New England. But he still finished 5 catches, 47 yards and a touchdown. And Aaron Rodgers obviously has a good rapport with him, and he has confidence in him. So right now is a flex option or a third receiver in a 3 receiver league here. I like Doubs at 27, 28, Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So right here, not a great matchup at all at the Buffalo Bills that pretty much lock up opposing offenses. And Deontay Johnson, we know he's a possession receiver. We know he's a good PPR receiver, but we'll see what he does with Kenny Pickett. And to be honest, Pickett can't be any worse, obviously, than a Mitchell Trubisky, who we saw the first 4 weeks of the season. And that guy, he just looks toast in my opinion. So Johnson, what a tough matchup with the new quarterback and Pickett coming in. He's at number 3 receiver flex option this week, and I got him at 28, 29. Allen Lazard of the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers are starting to find weapons, like I mentioned. Coming into the season, many people thought Lazard would be the number 1 guy over there in Green Bay. And right now, in my opinion, it's close between him and Romeo Doubs. Week 3 at Tampa, 4 catches, 45 yards, a touchdown. Week 4 versus New England, a monster ball game. 6 catches, 116 yards. So right here, Week 5, good matchup versus the New York Giants. And I think Allen Lazard could make a few plays in this game. He could get things going. And I got him this week at number 29, number 30, Jerry Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. So Jerry Jeudy had a big ball game in Week 1 catching a deep ball. Then Week 2 and 3 didn't do anything. But Week 4, Vegas, solid game, 4 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown. And Week 5 here, maybe Russell Wilson will get more comfortable with this Bronco offense and start hitting Jeudy more. But right now, I'm going to tamper my expectations and have him as a number 3 receiver or flex option at number 30. Number 31, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So I don't like McLaurin at all pretty much this season here, but he's a guy that still is a flex option in obviously 12-team leagues or deeper, but this season it hasn't been a great year for McLaurin, and the Dallas Cowboys shut him down in Week 4. 2 catches, 16 yards, but right here, Week 5, a good matchup on paper versus Tennessee. That gives up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So McLaurin, I'm not expecting much. He's probably going to be a decent wide receiver this week. Maybe 8, 12 fantasy points, but that's not saying much this week here. If I got him at 31, 32, Robert Woods of the Tennessee Titans staying in the same game. So the Commanders, their defense isn't good. We saw CeeDee Lamb have a big game last week. Obviously, Robert Woods is no CeeDee Lamb, but they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season here is Washington. And now with Treylon Burks hurt and probably not going to play here, Robert Woods, the last couple weeks, has had 12.5 and 13 fantasy points. And this week here, Washington, I could see a similar type of ball game. So as a flex or number 3 wide receiver, if you play that in your league, I got him at 32. 33, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. So Zach Wilson back last week, and he looked pretty decent versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But this Miami secondary is pretty decent in my opinion, and Howard might be on Garrett Wilson in this game. So last week with Wilson's return, Garrett Wilson only 2 catches, 41 yards on 6 targets. But the Miami Dolphins do give up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. But Wilson so far had 1 blow-up game in Week 2 at Cleveland. And right now, he's a guy that's on the fringe as a 3rd receiver or flex option. So I got him at 33, 34. Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions. So last week, a breakout ball game with DJ Chark and obviously Amon St. Brown out. So right now, I don't got St. Brown on this list, but if St. Brown plays, he's a top 12 wide receiver, no doubt about it. But right now, I'm doing this video before all the injury reports and stuff, and time of recording, St. Brown missed a game last week, but if he does play, he's a number 1 type of wide receiver for your team and a top 12 guy. But anyway, Josh Reynolds last week with an expanded role, 7 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. And this week, I know a tough matchup in New England, but I think he's going to be in there regardless. And he's a favorite target of Jared Goff. Over the last couple weeks here, he's got a lot of targets in the last 2 ball games. And this week, even if St. Brown and Chark are back, he's a guy, he's a number 3 receiver, a flex option. I'd be decently comfortable to play. Number 35, Juju Smith-Schuster of the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of people were hyped coming into the season that Smith-Schuster was going to be a monster wide receiver with this Chief team, but it's more Travis Kelce. It's the running backs doing some damage, and Mahomes just spreading the football out. So right here, Smith-Schuster, last couple games, Week 3 at Indy, 13.90 fantasy points. Last week at Tampa, 960. This week here, it's a beatable matchup versus Vegas, but he's a guy that really hasn't shown much with only 40 fantasy points on the season. He has Juju, and I got him at number 35 and the 36th and final receiver I'm ranking this week's Gabriel Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So right now, Gabriel Davis, in my opinion, anything so far in the early going. And I had high hopes for him coming into the season. I was a big Gabe Davis guy, but if this week he don't get the job done versus Pittsburgh with at least a serviceable ball game, 8 to 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues, he's a guy that you'd have to shy away from, and he might even be droppable. I know McKenzie's banged up right now with a concussion, and we don't know if he's going to play in this Week 5 game versus Pittsburgh, but it's a beatable matchup. He's been on the field a lot as Gabe Davis over the last 2 weeks with over 100 snaps played, targets in that time, and that's just not a good thing. But right now I'm going to pencil him in at number 36, so that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.